What if I told you that the most valuable coins in the UK aren't gold or silver? They're pennies. Yes, those little brown coins sitting in your change jar could be worth hundreds or even thousands of pounds. Today we're counting down the 5 rarest 1-penny coins in UK history. And trust me, number 1 will blow your mind. Check your pockets because you might be holding a hidden fortune. Before you spend that penny, you need to see this. Some UK 1-penny coins have sold for insane prices, not because they're old, but because of tiny minting errors or rare designs. Collectors are paying big money for coins you probably see every day. So stick around as we reveal 5 rare UK pennies that could turn your spare change into serious cash. Have you ever held a coin that marks the very edge of a royal era, a single year standing between the end of one of Britain's longest reigns and the dawn of a new monarchy? The 1936 1-penny is not just an ordinary copper coin, it is a witness to the final days of King George V, a coin struck at a time when the world was changing faster than ever before. In this video, we are diving deep into the extraordinary history behind the 1936 UK penny, a coin whose story is wrapped in royal transitions, minting secrets, and global significance. The 1936 penny might look small, but it holds within it a story of power-lost tradition and the unbroken line of British sovereignty that spans centuries. The year was 1936, and the British Empire stood vast and powerful, covering nearly a quarter of the Earth's land and people. At its center was King George V, a monarch who had ruled since 1910, guiding his nation through the Great War and the rapid modernization of the early 20th century. The 1-penny coin bearing his image was a familiar sight across the empire, from the streets of London to the ports of Bombay and the outposts of Africa. The penny of 1936 was struck at the Royal Mint in London, continuing a tradition that dated back centuries. The coin was made of bronze, an alloy of copper, tin, and zinc, weighing 945 grams with a diameter of 38 millimeters. It featured the famous seated Britannia on the reverse, a proud symbol of Britain's maritime power and empire, and on the obverse the dignified portrait of King George V, designed by Bertram McKennell. But the 1936 penny is more than metal and mint marks. It is a coin that stands as a silent witness to one of the most dramatic years in royal history. For in that very year, Britain would see not one but 3 kings. In January 1936, King George V passed away after 25 years on the throne. His death marked the end of an era that had seen the world change from horse-drawn carriages to motor cars, from telegraphs to radios, from the peace of Edwardian days to the chaos of the First World War. The coinage bearing his image suddenly became a memorial to the monarch who had guided his people through those turbulent times. After George V came Edward VIII, a modern and charismatic figure who sought to bring change to the monarchy. His reign, however, would last less than a year, and his decision to abdicate for love would become one of the most controversial events in British royal history. What makes this moment so important for coin collectors is that no official British pennies with Edward VIII's portrait were released for circulation. Though patterns and trial pieces were made, none ever reached the public, which means the 1936 penny became the final circulating penny of George V's era and the last official penny before the monarchy entered turmoil. The coins minted in 1936 were therefore produced early in the year under the authority of George V and continued to circulate throughout the transitional months when Edward VIII and later George VI took the throne. Because of this, the 1936 penny represents an extraordinary overlap in royal timelines, a tangible piece of a year unlike any other in British history. The Royal Mint had been preparing to strike coins for Edward VIII, but his insistence that his portrait face left the same direction as his father's broke the centuries-old tradition of alternating directions between monarchs. This disagreement delayed production, and by the time it was resolved, his abdication was imminent. As a result, no Edward VIII pennies entered circulation, leaving the 1936 issue as the last true penny. Of the old king's reign, collectors today value the 1936 penny, not because it is exceedingly rare, but because it stands as the end of a chapter. It is the final heartbeat of a numismatic lineage that began with Queen Victoria's old bronze pennies and evolved through the early 20th century. The bronze penny itself was part of a decimal system, established in 1860, that replaced the earlier copper coinage with a more practical and durable metal mix. The Britannia design, which had adorned the reverse since the reign of Charles II, was kept as a symbol of continuity and strength. Through every crisis from war to economic depression, the penny remained an icon of stability and familiarity in the pockets of ordinary Britons. By the 1930s, the penny had become a cornerstone of daily life. It could buy a newspaper, a loaf of bread, or a child's handful of sweets. Its wide use meant that millions of these coins were struck every year. The Royal Mint reported a mintage of over 46 million pennies in 1936, each one carrying the final effigy of George V, his face calm and stately, his image forever frozen in the bronze of empire. Yet beyond its circulation, the 1936 penny carries a sense of nostalgia for a nation on the verge of transformation. The following year, in 1937, new coins bearing the likeness of George VI would be introduced, and with them a new era would begin. The empire was changing industrially, politically, and socially. The Second World War was only 3 years away, and Britain's global role would soon be tested as never before. When you hold a 1936 penny, you are holding more than a coin. You are holding the weight of a turning point in modern British history. You are holding the last breath of a long reigning king, the pause before a nation faced its next storm, the bridge between the Edwardian grace of the early 20th century and the wartime resilience that would soon define a generation. The design itself reflects that mixture of dignity and endurance. The obverse portrait by Bertram McKennell was originally introduced in 1911 and depicts George V in royal robes facing left, surrounded by the Latin legend Gorgives 5, Digra, Brit Rex, Fide Def, NDIMP, meaning George V, by the grace of God, King of all the Britons, defender of the faith, Emperor of India. The reverse by Leonard Charles Wyon shows Britannia seated on a rock holding a trident and shield with the inscription 1 penny, and the date 1936 beneath her feet. This imagery, which had endured for generations, tied together Britain's naval supremacy and its imperial pride. During the mid-1930s, the British economy was recovering from the Great Depression coin production, reflected this gradual improvement as the Royal Mint resumed steady output levels. However, the minting technology was also evolving, presses were becoming more precise, and metal consistency improved, giving coins like the 1936 penny sharper detail and greater durability. Many examples from this year survive in high-grade condition, especially those that were stored in mint rolls or never saw extensive circulation. From a collector's perspective, the 1936 penny occupies a fascinating space. It is not considered rare in the traditional sense, but it is historically irreplaceable. It completes the story of George V's coinage and serves as the missing link before the unissued Edward VIII patterns and the fresh start under George VI. For this reason, sets of British pennies from 1902 to 1936 are often cherished as the full arc of a monarch's reign, ending with the calm dignity of this final date. In modern times, collectors seek 1936 pennies in top condition, with deep chocolate or red-brown patinas. Certified examples graded by major services such as PCGS or NGC, in uncirculated condition, can fetch respectable premiums not for scarcity, but for beauty and historical significance. The coin is often used as an educational tool to explain how numismatic design connects directly to the history of the monarchy and the shifting identity of the nation itself. If we look deeper into the context of 1936, we find that this coin was minted during a time of subtle anxiety. The empire, though vast, was beginning to show cracks. The Irish Free State had left the Commonwealth, the shadow of fascism loomed over Europe, and global economics were unstable. Yet the penny in your hand would have felt reassuringly familiar, a link to everyday normalcy that people could trust. The 1936 penny is a symbol of endurance. It carries the face of a king who led through world conflict and who preserved the stability of his realm. It bridges the past and future of British currency and encapsulates the essence of a nation standing between two worlds, the old empire and the modern age. In a world where every coin tells a story of kings and empires, of wars and revolutions, of craftsmanship and hidden secrets, one coin stands quietly in the shadow of time, yet carries the echo of a dying empire and the dawn of modern Britain. This is the story of the 1906 UK penny, a simple copper disc that holds inside it a century of change, blood, sweat, industry, and royal pride. In the early years of the 20th century, Britain stood as the most powerful empire on earth. Its currency dominated global trade, and the penny was the beating heart of its coinage system. In 1906, a single coin struck from bronze would become more than a unit of money. It would become a snapshot of an era, the 1906 UK penny minted during the reign of King Edward. The seventh represents not only British industry, but also the elegance of Victorian legacy transitioning into the modern age. Edward VII, the son of Queen Victoria, had ascended to the throne in 1901, and his image was one of refinement and sophistication. The design of the 1906 penny reflected this new direction. A portrait of the king facing right, engraved by George William de Saulles, who was one of the finest engravers of the Royal Mint. The portrait was dignified, yet human showing. The monarch with a touch of realism never seen before in previous designs. His short beard and calm expression reflected stability and the confidence of an empire at its height. The reverse of the coin carried one of Britain's most enduring symbols. Britannia, seated beside her trident and shield facing right towards the horizon, Britannia represented maritime dominance, unity, and the protection of the British Isles. For centuries she had appeared on the penny, and by 1906 she had become not just a design but a national emblem. Every detail of Britannia was deeply symbolic. The flowing robe represented purity, the shield bearing the Union flag symbolized defense of the realm, and the trident reminded the world that Britain ruled the seas. The 1906 penny was struck in bronze composed of 95% copper, 4% tin, and 1% zinc, a material chosen for both durability and workability. The coin measured 38 millimeters in diameter and weighed 9.4 grams. It was a sturdy coin meant to circulate widely among everyday people, from factory workers and farmers to soldiers and merchants across Britain and its colonies. Each penny passed through thousands of hands, carrying the sweat of labor and the stories of families during an age of rapid transformation. The early 1900s were marked by innovation, industrial power, and the beginnings of social change. In 1906, Britain was witnessing political shifts, with the Liberal Party coming into power led by Henry Campbell Bannerman, and reforms being introduced that would shape the welfare state. The coin thus circulated during a time when Britain was redefining itself from an empire of conquest to a society of modern governance. Every 1906 penny that exchanged hands was part of that transformation. In terms of production, the 1906 penny was minted at the Royal Mint in London under strict quality controls. The minting process involved multiple steps, starting with the creation of coin blanks cut from rolled bronze sheets. These blanks were annealed to soften the metal and then cleaned in acid before being struck under immense pressure between two engraved dies. The obverse die bore the portrait of King Edward VII, while the reverse carried Britannia. The precision of these dies and the skill of the engravers ensured that even mass-produced coins carried remarkable detail. Collectors today can still admire the fine texture of the king's hair and the intricate folds of Britannia's robe. The total mintage of the 1906 penny was approximately 47 million pieces, a substantial number that made it one of the more common issues of the Edwardian series. Yet despite its abundance, it remains highly collectible because of its historical importance. Coins of this era were not only used in Britain but also across the vast British Empire, from India and Australia to Canada and Africa, where the British monetary system influenced local economies in every colony. The penny was more than currency. It was a reminder of British authority and connection to the crown. Now, imagine life in 1906, the streets of London bustling with carriages and early motor cars, the air filled with smoke from coal fires, the news filled with talk of the empire's achievements. The penny jingled in the pockets of bakers, shopkeepers, and schoolchildren. It could buy a loaf of bread or a pint of milk. It could be saved for a week to purchase a newspaper or a train ticket. It represented the rhythm of daily life and the trust in the monarch's image that guaranteed its value over time. The 1906 penny began to witness major world events. It circulated through the last years of Edward's reign and into that of his successor, George V. It was spent during the years leading to the First World War. It passed through the hands of soldiers, their families, and merchants during one of history's most devastating conflicts. After the war, many pennies from the Edwardian era were worn down or withdrawn, yet some survived, kept as keepsakes in drawers and jars, symbols of an older, simpler Britain. Numismatically, the 1906 penny marks an important point in the evolution of British coinage. Collectors prize it, not for rarity, but for representation. It captures a transition from the Victorian design tradition to the modern style that would later define the George V and VI series. High-grade examples particularly, those with full detail and original luster, are highly valued by numismatists. Coins struck in brilliant uncirculated condition showcase the craftsmanship of the Royal Mint at its finest, with sharp edges and deep bronze tones that glow with age. There are also interesting varieties among the 1906 pennies. Subtle differences in the strike, the positioning of the lettering, and the texture of the metal can distinguish one coin from another. Some specimens show slight doubling on the lettering, others display small die cracks or misaligned strikes, making them desirable among variety collectors. One particular detail that experts look for is the clarity of the rim and the evenness of the fields, which indicates how well the coin was struck and how well it has been preserved over more than a century. Beyond its physical characteristics, the 1906 penny is a tangible link to King Edward VII himself, known as the Peacemaker. Edward was a monarch who modernized the British monarchy. His reign, though short, was marked by charm, diplomacy, and cultural revival. Under his rule, Britain enjoyed relative peace, prosperity, and a golden age of social progress. The 1906 penny therefore carries his legacy in metal. The calm expression of the king on the coin contrasts with the turbulence that the world would soon face in the years after his death as the 20th century moved forward and the monarchy passed from Edward to George and then to the Windsors. The old bronze pennies continued to circulate well into the mid-century, but by the time of decimalization in 1971, the pre-decimal penny was finally withdrawn from circulation, marking the end of over 1,000 years of penny history. Today, the 1906 penny is more than a collectible. It is a piece of the British soul, a relic of an empire that once stretched across the globe, a whisper from a time when the world was changing, but still held to tradition. For coin collectors and historians, the 1906 penny tells a story of craftsmanship, empire, and endurance. Each surviving example carries its own journey from the mint to the markets across decades of hands and generations of lives. It connects the modern collector to the workers who earned it, the monarch who authorized it, and the engraver who designed it. It is a piece of history that still breathes today. And so when you hold a 1906 UK penny in your hand, you are not holding just a coin. You are holding a moment, a memory, a nation's pride pressed into bronze, a coin that survived wars, peace, industrial revolutions, and royal successions. Its color may have faded, but its story glows brighter than ever. Have you ever held a small copper coin and wondered if it could unlock the secrets of an entire empire? Today, we step back into one of the most defining years in British history, the year 1937, the year when a single penny changed the face of a nation and became the silent witness to the dawn of a new royal era. This is not just a coin. This is a piece of living history, a symbol of transition from the solemn end of one reign to the powerful beginning of another. So buckle up as we dive deep into the incredible untold story of the 1937 UK penny. The 1937 one-penny coin of the United Kingdom represents a turning point in both numismatic and royal history. It stands at the crossroads between the twilight of the British Empire and the fresh dawn of a modern monarchy. Its design, craftsmanship, and historical backdrop all come together to form a tale that captures the essence of Britain during one of its most fascinating decades. As the world moved into the late 1930s, tension was rising across Europe, but within the United Kingdom, a new hope had emerged. King George VI had ascended the throne after the dramatic abdication of his brother, King Edward VIII, in 1936. The abdication crisis had shaken the monarchy to its core, and when George VI took the crown, the nation needed reassurance, stability, and symbols of continuity. That is where the 1937 penny enters history, not as just another coin, but as a statement of endurance, a coin that quietly proclaimed the strength of the crown and the steadfast spirit of Britain. The Royal Mint, located at Tower Hill in London, was tasked with producing a new series of coins to mark the beginning of George VI's reign. The designs were revised to feature the new monarch, and among them, the penny stood out as one of the most circulated and symbolic pieces. The engraver was Thomas Humphrey Paget, one of Britain's most skilled medallic artists. His initials HP can be seen beneath the king's neck on the obverse of the coin. Paget's portrait of King George VI was dignified and straightforward, without the crown, a deliberate choice to represent humility and service in contrast to royal grandeur. It symbolized the character of a king who never expected to rule, but accepted the burden of leadership with unwavering duty. The reverse of the coin retained the iconic image of Britannia, seated holding a trident, and shield, a design that had adorned British pennies since 1797. This continuity was no coincidence. After the turbulence of the abdication, the British people needed a reminder of their nation's long-standing traditions. Britannia, with her calm presence and maritime power, represented both stability and the imperial strength that defined Britain. At the time, the inscriptions read, Gorgiv Sias DGBR OMN Rex FD and Imp, meaning George VI, by the grace of God, King of all the Britons, defender of the faith, Emperor of India. The phrase Emperor of India carried enormous weight in 1937 as the British Empire was still vast, spanning from Africa to Asia, though whispers of independence were already rising in places like India. This inscription marked the last generation of coins to carry the imperial title before it would vanish after. Indian independence in 1947. In technical terms, the 1937 penny was made of bronze composed of 95% copper, 4% tin, and 1% zinc. It measured 38 millimeters in diameter and weighed 9.45 grams. The Royal Mint struck millions of these coins intended for circulation, though in pristine condition they remain valuable to collectors, especially those marked as proof issues for the coronation. Year proofs were specially polished and struck multiple times to achieve a mirror-like surface. These were often presented in coronation proof sets, a limited issue that today fetches high prices among numismatists. The 1937 penny was the first of its kind under George VI, and its mintage reflected a sense of optimism. Britain was modernizing, the economy was slowly recovering from the Great Depression, and industry was picking up again, but clouds were already gathering over Europe. The rise of Nazi Germany and the growing tension between major powers made 1937 one of those deceptively calm years before the storm coins like the 1937 penny circulated among people who could not yet imagine the global conflict that would erupt just 2 years later. This coin was in the pockets of soldiers who would go on to fight in World War II, factory workers who kept the home front running, and children who used it to buy sweets on the corner shop. It became part of the rhythm of British life. When looking closely at a genuine 1937 penny, you'll notice the smooth rim, the crisp edges of Britannia's shield, and the fine detailing of the king's hair and neckline. These were signs of the mint's quality in striking a new reign. Collectors often note that early strikes from 1937 exhibit remarkable clarity compared to later wartime issues, when metal shortages and production pressure reduced overall quality. As Britain entered the war in 1939, the minting of coins was affected dramatically, but the 1937 issue remains a symbol of pre-war craftsmanship and royal renewal. Interestingly, there was never a 1937 penny struck for Edward VIII. Although a few pattern coins were created during his brief reign, they never entered circulation, and are today among the rarest and most valuable coins in British history. That makes the 1937 George VI penny even more historically significant, as it became the first coin of a new monarch following one of the most scandalous moments in royal history. Over the decades, the 1937 penny has captured the attention of coin historians, not just for its design, but for its timing. It marked the beginning of the end for the long-running Britannia reverse, which would finally be replaced in 1971. When the UK adopted decimal currency, the penny we hold from 1937 therefore represents both continuity and change, the old and the new. It reminds us that coins are not mere currency, but storytelling devices, tiny monuments to eras of change. Every mark, edge, and engraving carries the weight of its time. In the post-war years, many 1937 pennies continued to circulate through the 1940s and 1950s until the pre-decimal system was phased out. Collectors began saving them for their regal portrait, and their connection to the coronation year And even today, when you hold a 1937 penny, you hold a piece of that history, the pride of an empire, the hope of a nation, and the dignity of a reluctant king. As you look at this small bronze piece, imagine the world it witnessed, the changing skyline of London, the echo of speeches from Winston Churchill, the courage of everyday citizens during the Blitz, the gradual transformation of Britain into a modern democracy, and through it all, this coin passed, from hand to hand, silently preserving the spirit of an era long gone. Imagine holding in your hand a small copper coin that once carried the weight of a fading empire, a coin that passed through the hands of soldiers, poets, and common workers of a nation rebuilding after the Great War, a coin minted in the shadows of change, and yet so easily forgotten. The 1921 one penny of the United Kingdom is not just a coin, it is a time capsule, a silent witness to a turbulent decade of hope, loss, and transformation. Today, we uncover its true story from the mints that crafted it to the hearts of collectors who treasure it a century later. Welcome to the untold history of the 1921 UK penny, a story of art, politics, and power, all engraved in copper. The 1921 one penny coin of the United Kingdom was struck during a time of great uncertainty and recovery for the British Empire. The First World War had ended only 3 years earlier, and the United Kingdom was still dealing with its aftermath. The cost of the war had drained the economy. Unemployment was rising, and the political landscape was shifting. Yet despite all of this, the Royal Mint continued its mission of producing coinage that represented the stability and continuity of the crown. The penny was one of the most recognized coins of the British monetary system, and in 1921 it carried more symbolic weight than ever before. This coin featured on its obverse the right-facing bust of King George V, the image designed by Bertram McKennell, the Australian sculptor who had created one of the most iconic royal portraits of the early 20th century. His depiction of the king was dignified, strong, and slightly somber, perfectly fitting for a monarch leading his people through the difficulties of post-war Britain. Around the portrait ran the Latin legend, Gorgivs 5 da igra Brit omn rex fid def indiemp, translating to George V, by the grace of God, king of all the Britons, defender of the faith, emperor of India. This inscription reminded citizens of Britain's global reach and the unity of its vast empire, even at a time when cracks were beginning to appear. On the reverse stood Britannia, the personification of Britain herself, seated proudly with her trident and shield designed by Leonard Charles Wyon. The design was already over half a century old by 1921, but it remained timeless, a symbol of naval power, strength, and protection. Britannia faced right toward the sea, watching over the empire. With determination, her shield bore the Union flag, and at her side rested a trident and an olive branch, symbols of strength and peace. The word one penny appeared around her, with the date 1921 positioned below her figure. This imagery reminded every citizen that even in times of hardship, Britain's identity endured. The penny of 1921 was struck in bronze, an alloy made up of 95% copper, 4% tin, and 1% zinc, a blend that had been used since 1860. When the bronze coinage replaced the older copper pennies, the coin measured 38 millimeters in diameter and weighed 9.45 grams. Its size and feel were substantial, making it one of the most iconic coins in everyday circulation. The Royal Mint produced these coins at its Tower Hill facility in London, although records suggest that smaller batches may have been prepared for testing new minting techniques, which were being refined for higher production efficiency. By 1921, the British currency system was still based on the pre-decimal standard 12 pennies to a shilling, and 20 shillings to a pound. The penny remained the backbone of everyday transactions, from small purchases in shops to wages and fares on trams and buses. The common people saw this coin every day. It bought bread, newspapers, and daily essentials. But behind this ordinary use lay a remarkable history tied to world events and economic transitions. After the Great War, Britain's economy had been shaken. Inflation rose dramatically, and the value of the pound fluctuated. Wages struggled to keep up with rising costs, yet coin production remained vital. The Royal Mint maintained large outputs of bronze coins to replace older worn coins and to support trade within the empire. The 1921 penny was part of this effort, a coin born out of necessity. And tradition collectors and historians later noted that the 1921 penny marked the end of an era. Soon after its mintage, the bronze composition of pennies would undergo review, and technological improvements would change how these coins were struck. While not as rare as some earlier Victorian or Edwardian issues, the 1921 penny holds immense historical value because it represents the interwar transition period and reflects the daily life of millions of citizens who lived in a changing world. Terms of mintages, approximately 120 million pennies were struck in 1921, though exact figures vary across different historical records. Most of these coins were circulated widely throughout Britain and its colonies, meaning few survive. In pristine condition today, finding a 1921 penny in uncirculated or mint state condition is considered a significant achievement for collectors due to its century-old history and the extensive wear most coins experienced through years of use for collectors. The 1921 penny's value depends heavily on its condition coins. In very fine condition might fetch modest prices, while those in extremely fine or uncirculated grades can command significantly higher values depending on the market and the demand within the numismatic community. Some specimens have been discovered with slight variations in striking details, such as rim thickness or lettering depth, leading researchers to study their origins and production batches in greater depth. The penny also connects to deeper social and cultural stories in the early 1920s. Britain was adjusting to the loss of so many lives from the war, the rise of new political movements, and the beginning of social reforms. Coins like the 1921 penny circulated. Through these years as silent witnesses, they passed through hands that voted in post-war elections, through factories where labor movements grew stronger, and through homes that were rebuilding families broken by the war. Every penny had its own journey, carrying both monetary and emotional value. As the 1920s continued, the British government began looking toward modernization of its coinage system. Yet the image of Britannia and King George V remained a symbol of unity until the King's death in 1936. The 1921 penny thus sits squarely within this narrative of continuity, resilience, and imperial identity. The craftsmanship of McKennell and Wyon combined two eras of artistry representing both the old Victorian vision of empire and the new modern identity of Britain. The composition of the metal used in 1921 pennies also tells a fascinating industrial story. The Royal Mint worked closely with metal suppliers to ensure the precise alloy composition because even small deviations could cause problems during striking and circulation. During the early 1920s, there were reports of fluctuations in copper availability as the global metal market adjusted after wartime shortages. This affected not only coinage, but also industries like shipbuilding and electrical manufacturing. The penny, therefore, was a product of both economic necessity and national symbolism. Over time, the 1921 penny gained attention from collectors worldwide, not because of an immediate rarity, but because of its role as a transitional coin from the Great War generation to the Roaring Twenties, a period that defined much of 20th century culture today. Numismatists see this coin as a bridge between history and art, a modest object that connects economic data with human experience. When examined under magnification, the level of craftsmanship becomes evident. The fine details of the king's beard, the precise waves beneath Britannia's feet, and the crisp lettering all demonstrate the skill of engravers and the precision of the mint's equipment. Even after 100 years, many surviving examples retain these details, showing the lasting quality of British minting traditions. The 1921 penny was also part of the circulation across parts of the British Empire, including Ireland until 1928, India, and several colonial territories. British currency served as a standard of stability and trust. Its circulation across continents made it one of the most recognized coin designs in the world. The story of this penny therefore extends far beyond Britain itself, reaching places where the empire's influence was felt from Asia to Africa and the Caribbean as the century turned and Britain underwent decimalization in 1971. The old penny became obsolete, but the 1921 penny and others of its kind never lost their charm. They are now historical artifacts cherished for their artistry and cultural significance in museums and private collections. They remind us of the everyday, people whose lives were shaped by the events of their time. The legacy of the 1921 penny is more than metal and design. It is the embodiment of endurance in an age of uncertainty. It connects us to a moment when Britain was rebuilding, redefining, And rediscovering itself through change and challenge, this small coin stands as a symbol of that journey. Its value lies not only in copper, but in the human stories it silently carried from one generation to another.